on 15 of 17 counts, along with Randall Shelton. Joining us to talk and get his reaction, who's someone he was in the courtroom yesterday as the verdict came down, we have attorney Josh Waters is with us. Hey, Josh, welcome back, sir.
Hey, good morning, Paul.
Good morning to you. Hey, Josh, have you ever been on when we were doing Johnny Cash Fridays? I can't remember. Is this your first Johnny Cash Friday to be on the program?
I'm not sure. Probably not, but it might be.
I don't know. I don't know if you've ever been on Johnny Cash. I don't know if you've ever been on. But anyway, yeah, we've had you on a bunch, so yeah, probably you are. All right, so Josh, tell us, where were you when the jury was called back in and John Woods was found guilty?
I was in the federal courtroom there. I was on row 5, towards the very end of that row. That's exactly where I was. And what was happening, Paul, is the judge was actually hearing from the attorneys on a question that the jurors had sent back earlier in the day, and he had sent a response back. And then in the middle of that kind of mini hearing, another note came back that the jury had reached a verdict. And so immediately the judge called him in, and they were in there, and he said, "Have you reached a verdict? Have you filled out all the forms?" But they had reached a verdict, but because there are 17 verdict forms they had to fill out individually, they actually had to go back to the jury room and finish filling those out and then come back again. So the suspense was, I think killing everyone to know, because they, for about 20 minutes, 15 minutes maybe, we knew there was a verdict, but they're still waiting on the jurors to fill out the forms.
I was constantly refreshing the Conduit News Twitter feed. I saw the initial tweet, which was, they've reached a verdict. And then I was just feverishly refreshing constantly. Where is it? I understand there's one report this morning that said that there was some talk of a mistrial. Is that true?
Well, that kind of has to be put into context, because the defense attorney, especially for John Woods, asked for a mistrial, I don't know how many times throughout the trial. So that was correct. He asked for a mistrial, but that was more for appeal purposes. It was quickly denied without really much discussion.
Okay.
So, yes, he asked for a mistrial during this, small hearing about the jury question, but he had asked for a mistrial, almost every other day.
Mm-hmm. So John Woods found guilty on 15 of 17 counts. Randall Shelton also found guilty. I don't have the number in front of me, but I think was it 12 of 15 or something like that?
Yes.
Okay, 12 of 15. What was the reaction when the verdict was read in the courtroom? Did the defendants already know the outcome, or were they hearing it for the first time?
No, everyone was hearing it, for the first time as it was being read for the judge. So no one knew. It was read out by the judge for the first time for everyone. The reaction, there was no audible gasp or anyone breaking down crying really from the family and from the defendant. Randall Shelton looked very sad and sullen, but from the family members I could see up on the front row, it was more of a frustration, anger kind of a look. And then on the second row, Representative Janet De La Rosa was there, and she was crying. But I didn't see that from, the family members on the front row or from the defendants themselves. So the rest of the courtroom just pretty quiet, calm, just taking all the information in as they're going through those 17 verdict forms.
You said that State Representative Janet De La Rosa was crying in the courtroom? Is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, she
ahead.
had been there the last several days, in the room waiting with former Senator Woods, and so she was very visibly upset when the verdict came in.
What's interesting is and look, I know people are they're friends, quite frankly. I mean, if you look at the relationship that Janet
I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers.
They seem to be in full-scale retreat from spending cuts and are talking about raising people's taxes again. And I have only one thing to say to the tax increasers. Go ahead, make my day.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. Those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is on now.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the program. Good morning. Thanks, everybody, for being with us. If you're just joining us, you have found the intersection of conservative ideas and reality where we are building a liberty machine, and we need your help to do that. One of the ways you can do that is to call us or text us. That number, 870-275-9799. Or we are broadcasting live right now on Facebook, facebook.com/Conduit News, over at conduitnews.com. Which admittedly we had somebody find their way yesterday from conduitnews.com over to the Facebook page, and they said, wow, it's more fun on the Facebook page because the comments are so much more interactive and everything else, full of like-minded patriots. We got a great show for you. Coming up at the bottom of this hour, we'll be talking with Tim Loggins from the Patriots of Act 746. Also at 7:33, State Representative Dan Sullivan will be stopping by. In the meantime, we do have a lot of news to get to. Honestly, there were some. I will just tell you this. Because we're now in the primary season and the election season, social media is abuzz. Everything's popping. Everything's at an all-time high. Everybody is super sensitive. And what I have noticed is the people who are most sensitive are those who have the most to lose if the Marble Palace establishment types don't get their way. If the people actually rise up electorally and go to the ballot box and vote for those candidates that want to end corruption, want to change the status quo, that actually want to see limited government, less regulations, lower taxes implemented, that is making the Asa Hutchinson types, the Asa Hutchinson water boys, the Asa Hutchinson loyalists in every form of government extremely nervous. They know the truth about tax increases is getting out. They know the truth about increased spending is getting out. The lawsuit from a fired, the claim that there's a poultry commission employee who was wrongfully terminated for not hiring who Asa wanted him to hire, that's now getting out there, and that's making the Marble Palace establishment and everybody who's at court down there very, very nervous. And so what happens is, these people have got to do something to express themselves. And I honestly think some of it, if not all of it, let's say some of it, has to do with, it has to do with a lot of it is this program. A lot of it has to do with our parodies, that we're making so much fun of these people. We're having a lot of laughs at their expense, and so now they, in a contrived way, go out on social media and they feel like they have to compensate. For that, they feel like they have to compete with that, and it's driving them nuts. I'm telling you right now. And I'm about to prove to you how unhinged some of these people are. But I'm telling you right now, they are worried that the people of this state are getting the message and that they're going to make a change at the ballot box. They're worried about the primaries. They're worried about the status quo, changing and the people getting more power. And so, with that said, let me tell you about a former state representative. There's a former state representative, and his name is Nate Bell, and he is no fan of mine at all. I interviewed him one time, and I this is purely speculative, but he came on the program one time, And at the end of the program, I asked him, because I had heard reports about a year and a half earlier that he said he wasn't going to run for re-election again. Well, then the issue 3 passed, and all of the sudden, the term limits were much larger for incumbents, and so he didn't have to go. And so I asked him. I said, you had said before that you were done, and so I got him on record. He said, yeah, I'm still done. And something tells me that maybe sometimes I think maybe he wanted to keep running again or something. But anyway, ever since, and then he left the GOP and became an independent. He's a huge never-Trumper, Nate Bell is, on social media and everything else. And he cannot stand Jan Morgan. He cannot stand, I think what I would consider true limited government conservatives. I think he was a big Marco Rubio supporter in the primary. But, a lot of people the primary, you can't really hold anybody accountable for the primary because it was crazy. There were 17 candidates or everything else. But ever since, this is what I have noticed. Ever since State Representative Nate Bell, former State Representative Nate Bell, has removed himself from office or decided not to run again, all of his social media posts seem to be compensating for not being a state representative. And so he definitely injects himself into the debate. And so yesterday, he put out an attack piece, from what I can tell, on 2 different platforms, Facebook and Twitter. Let's get to the first one, okay? He wrote 14 days on Twitter, 14 days until No Plan Jan will have more time to take care of her important affairs. And he links to an article, he links to a letter from the Department of Finance and Administration here in Arkansas that claims that Jan Morgan owes a significant amount of back taxes as far as the Arkansas individual income tax. And it's from March of 2015. Well, this claim was almost immediately debunked. It was immediately debunked. As a matter of fact, if you scroll down in this tweet thread, not that Jan Morgan obviously replies and debunks it, but look who else is debunking it. State Representative Charlie Collins responds to former State Representative Nate Bell by saying, Nate, Jan has answered this on her page. It was a clerical error by the Department of Finance and Administration. She did not owe this tax. Wow. First of all, kudos to State Representative Charlie Collins. We don't agree on most anything. And who knows, maybe State Representative Charlie Collins is thinking, hey, I might have to work with Jan Morgan as governor. Who knows? But the facts are the facts, right? This was almost, and by the way, the fact that it was a clerical error by the Department of Finance and Administration is just really it just supports Jan Morgan's whole campaign when we're talking about limiting government and how government's too big and we're overtaxed and harassed in many ways. And I guess I'll be expecting that audit any time now that I've said that. Let's go to what Jan Morgan says. Jan Morgan, she said this on Facebook about this false post by former State Representative Nate Bell, who, again, is compensating for not being a state representative. Jan Morgan writes, about the lies spread by my opponent and his water boys. She writes, it's almost comical when your opposition resorts to straw grasping rather than facts to try and save a doomed campaign. Now for the facts behind this. The last picture is being used as a smear campaign by my desperate opponent and his minions. We'll go over why Nate Bell is a minion of Asa here in just a moment. It represents a clerical error by the Arkansas Department of Finance, which was cleared up as soon as I became aware of it. I lived and worked in Texarkana. We have a border tax exemption there to be competitive with Texarkana, Texas. Now, this is true. And you know what? You want to know something? The fact that we have a border tax exemption for Texarkana is a rebuke of the entire Arkansas state tax code. Because if the Arkansas state tax code was imposed on Texarkana, Arkansas, that town would cease to exist pretty much overnight. But in order to be competitive with Texas, they have to adopt some sort of Texas tax code, which is, lower, more competitive, and more freedom, more money in your pocket to choose what you want to do with it, not the government. My goodness. Hey, if anything, the fact that Jan Morgan lived in Texarkana, Arkansas, and got that exemption, she knows what it's like, and maybe we'll all benefit from that experience if she's elected governor. So it represents a clerical error by the Department of Finance, which was cleared up as soon as I became aware of it. I lived and worked in Texarkana. We have the border tax exemption. She goes on. When I moved to Hot Springs and filed my taxes from my new address, the Department of Finance computer inadvertently removed the exemption and billed me for the tax. Once I provided proof from my Texarkana employer and the proper exemption notices signed, I was sent the below letter from the State Department of Finance acknowledging the mistake and saying I had zero balance. I never owed the money. Clerical error. Proof. I'm clear. She has the documents right here. End of story. Plus, I called the State Department of Finance today and clarified once again I have a zero balance and have had a zero balance for years. I talked to Jan yesterday, and you know what she said to me? She said, Paul, what kind of person would I be if I ran for office and I had all of these other people who are knocking doors, putting up billboards, doing all of this stuff, sacrificing their money to try to get the message of a constitutional conservative out to the masses? What kind of person would I be if I ran knowing that I owed $7,000 in back taxes, and how that would just essentially, it would devastate everybody? What kind of person would I be? And that's exactly right. Now, she finishes her post by saying, come on, Asa, is that the best you can do? You know very well I have a zero balance with the Department of Finance and Administration. Technically, that's his agency. Yet you put your water boys up to spreading false info to try and save your flailing campaign so you can continue your real gravy train of corruption in Little Rock at our expense. Now, how about that debate? By the way, folks, candidate Jan Morgan is the only one in this race who is saying what is good for Texarkana residents should be good for all Arkansans. I'm the candidate who has said from the beginning we need to work towards eliminating the state income tax for all Arkansans. And so she talks about these pictures, and then you can see them there on her post from the DFNA, essentially clearing her. Now, you don't want to know, click on the photo that is actually where the accusation was made. Half the story. The one that, that one. So here's the one that Nate Bell was putting out there that was immediately proven false, or proven really you didn't have the whole story. If you'll notice, when they pulled this file on February 9th of 2018 because they got it notarized as a certified original copy. And see that 2018 stamp right there, okay, or dated right there, is meant to confuse you. It's meant to generate false information. If you look up, this letter's from 2015, but they want you to think it's from 2018, and just telling you they're really trying to not only carefully craft their language, but they carefully craft their political attacks that are, I guess, steeped in half-truths, if not outright lies. Now, let's talk about why State Representative Nate Bell is so against Jan Morgan winning and Asa Hutchinson maintaining his power. Let's talk about it. And I think anything that comes out of Nate Bell in his social media, any opinion about this race or about Arkansas in general or the Hutchinson administration has got to be viewed through this lens. Nate Bell's spouse, his wife, works for the office of Governor Asa Hutchinson, making $83,999.76 a year. And it's right there. It's a part of public record. There's a very good chance, especially now, there's a very good chance that if Jan Morgan wins, she's going to bring in her own people that work for the office of the governor. And so if Jan Morgan wins, there's a good chance that Nate Bell, former state representative Nate Bell, who is compensated on social media for not being a state representative anymore, there's a very good chance that Nate Bell's household's going to lose $84,000 a year in income. And that is what we call a financial incentive, ladies and gentlemen. Now, moving on to a different bit of weirdness, and when I said people are freaking out, well, I'm going to stick with this for a second, Joe. When I said people are freaking out, or they're kind of trying to be funny, and it's in a contrived way, and they're trying to compete with all of us limited government folks that want to see a real change. We actually want to see the intersection of conservative ideas and reality. We just don't want you to talk about it on the campaign trail and pretend and use powerful, popular Republican Party platform ideas, but then come back to us with excuses as to why that you can't implement them. Here's Tom Fight. Tom Fight, speaking of spouses, is the husband of State Representative Charlene Fight. And he made this comment on Facebook. This is a picture of Charlene and me. In the center is Jan Morgan waiting on me to vote for her. And it's the two of them posed with a skeleton, I guess some sort of scientific instruction. You know, it's just a skeleton on, and it's extreme. And I commented on it because I was like, weird. That's weird. That's not funny at all. It's just weird, right? Here's the picture of Jan Morgan waiting on me to vote for, and it's just a skeleton, meaning Jan Morgan would wait there and die before that would happen. And then, of course, Nate Bell strikes again. Scrolling down in the comments, you see Nate Bell writes, well, this certainly puts an end to the Jezebel claims. I see no makeup and no exposed skin on Miss Morgan. Again, gross. Gross. What is wrong with these people? We're going to take a break. You're listening to Conduit News Radio. Back in a moment.
Arkansans need a true judicial conservative on the Supreme Court. David Sterling is that man. Sterling believes in the separation of powers in our government, and he will interpret the Constitution based on the original intent of the Founding Fathers. A member of the NRA and the Christian Legal Society, Sterling will serve Arkansans with honor and integrity as our next Supreme Court Justice. On May 22nd, vote David Sterling.
Paid for by Friends of David Sterling.
Exposing the truth and everything the Marble Palace establishment keep trying to cover up. It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
So let me continue with the rundown of what happened. Okay, so because we only have 6 minutes until the next break. So then at some point, State Representative Ann Clemmer was in traffic yesterday, and she was listening, I think, to the show because of her tweet. It was at like 7:58. It was right before we went off the air, and she said something about whack job radio. Who holds whack job radio hosts accountable? Wild claims of corruption abound. Really, Ann? Are they wild claims, or are they being proven in courts? Are they wild claims, or are they being proven in courts? What do you think? Or are they being validated by guilty pleas? Guilty plea after guilty plea. Anyway, somehow, and I can't find it, but I've got the screenshots that were sent to me. This post on Twitter gets translated to Facebook, where State Representative Nate Bell's no good, very bad day just gets bad to worse, and he goes nuclear. And he I think it was because he, I don't know. I think it was because he was proven wrong so instantly with his attack on Jan Morgan, and State Representative Charlie Collins defended Jan Morgan and everything else. And I think it was too much for him to handle, so he just went vitriolic with the hate for Conduit. He resurrected this false claim that Conduit co-founder Joe Maynard makes all of his money on government contracts. And by the way, there are no government contracts. You see, the funny thing about Conduit is when they write an article, they actually source it with footnotes, which is something that Nate Bell and his claims he doesn't do. Again, he's former state representative Nate Bell, and he's compensating on social media for not being a state representative anymore. And here it is. Here's the interesting thing about all this. If you really want to know, Joe, show them this 2014 article. If you really want to know why State Representative Nate Bell has such a disdain for Conduit News, he can't stand me personally. He thinks I'm just a big phony. He thinks that the only reason I say this, that I do the things that I do are because I'm a paid, shill, and that's not true at all. I believe the things that I say, but insult my integrity. That's fine. But this is the article that really upsets Nate Bell. See, Nate Bell originally was against Medicaid expansion in 2013, but then he had to find a way to vote for the funding of it in 2014. And so Conduit for Action has been at this for years, and they exposed, the contrived way that politicians wanted to be with the in crowd, wanted to be with the bigger government Republicans, and he just hasn't. He has not gotten over that yet. And so if you scroll down in this article, this is section 16. These were about amendments trying to find a way to vote for it. It writes, Representative Nate Bell proposed amendments in 2014 to various bills to prohibit various state agencies from expending funds to promote the private option. Trying to basically advertise people to get on it. The language for the Department of Human Services is new. The language has already been criticized as being minimally effective. They said it was going to be a game changer. Of course, we read the bill. We knew it wasn't going to be. There are another couple of aspects of the language that may have been overlooked. The advertising restriction only applies for 1 year. Why is it temporary? It could have been proposed as a permanent restriction. Why wait to July 1st? There was a bunch of things. Anyway, it was just criticism of this, saying, look, this is not conservative. Even though you want supporting Obamacare Medicaid expansion to be conservative, you cannot put enough lipstick on the pig to make it attractive. Conduit for Action back in 2014 concluded of the Bell amendments. In conclusion, the more quickly the proponents of the private option increase enrollment and benefits, the less likely it is that Arkansas will ever reform Medicaid to ensure it survives for those in need. It's considered the opinion of Conduit for Action that these amendments, cloaked with a veneer of tough talk, triggers, and reduced enrollment, simply and intentionally speed the implementation and expansion of free services to Arkansans who are able-bodied, non-age disabled at great risk to Arkansas's vulnerable and frail. Now, that conclusion from 2014 is 100% verified and true because the enrollment skyrocketed anyway. The enrollment went from 215,000 to as high as 320,000 people. So just so you know, and that's also got to be very bitter for former State Representative Nate Bell. But he can go on and continue spewing this, and that's fine. But you know what? I wouldn't have even mentioned any of this because most of the time, I mean, I've seen State Representative Nate Bell's comments on Twitter and Facebook and stuff, and I just ignore him. But he basically made himself part of the news by instituting a pro-Asa Hutchinson attack against Jan Morgan that was instantly proven false with documentation. Again, documentation or footnotes. If you make an accusation, you should be willing to back it up with more than just yourself saying it. You should actually source some of the stuff you say. Anyway, Nate Bell's no good, very bad day. We're going to be back with Patriots of Act 746, Mr. Tim Loggins, coming up next.
They've got Conduit News that is on multiple stations across the state. It's pretty much an attack machine on what I'm trying to accomplish in this state, and their message is getting out, and no one else's message is getting through.
It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
De La Rosa has with John Woods and her political action committee, Conservative Arkansas, which is not a conservative political action committee, but they certainly have the name to try to make people think that they're conservative. It's interesting. Now, speaking of Jenna De La Rosa, though, Randall Shelton's consulting company that was the subject of so much controversy, it's Paradigm Strategies.
Strategic Consulting.
Strategic Consulting. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So Jan De La Rosa actually gave money to that. Is that correct? Gave money to that firm?
Yes, and that's something that came up twice in the case. The first time when they're actually putting the exhibit on, it showed Paradigm Strategic Consulting's bank records. And, like you said, this was the consulting company that Randall Shelton had set up to funnel all this money through from Ecclesia College. And the jury decided yesterday this is a fraudulent entity that was set up to send kickbacks and bribes through. And the only other entity, Paul, that had sent any money in any way, according to these bank records that were brought out in court and brought up again in closing, was the Jana De La Rosa campaign. Was the only other entity that had directed money to this now what's been deemed a fraudulent entity for kickbacks and bribes.
Well, and that didn't make it. What's weird, it's strange because I knew that came out. I mean, I know you were taking vigorous notes, but it didn't. That actually didn't make it in any of Doug Thompson's reporting. That one piece right there.
I know he reported about like 93% of the money came from Ecclesia, which is true. But then when you look at the rest of the breakdown, the only other entity that was on there was the Jana De La Rosa campaign for $2,500 in 2014.
So,
and she reported it on her campaign finance report.
Yeah, and so it's like it's all, I guess, they're very cozy. I mean, because if I've got a sworn complaint, from I think back in 2000, I guess it would have been 16, but I think that's what it is. But that these are activities that happened in 2012, and it mentions Al Hollingsworth, and that this is just kind of illustrates. So this guy named Al Hollingsworth gave Conservative Arkansas, that political action committee,
determined to drain the swamp in Little Rock. It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
Yes, some of these people, I would just tell you, man, these people who stand to lose power. I mean, look, the only thing we can do as people who just want the truth out there, I believe if the truth is out there, people are going to make the right decisions. And I think there's just not enough people that actually understand comprehensively what's going on. And so really and truly, the way I approach this, and I'm not perfect because sometimes I do not do this, okay? Sometimes I worry, sometimes I fret, just like all of you. But my ideal mindset is just to speak the truth and let the chips fall where they may. And I am so grateful to Conduit News to have a platform where I can talk conservatism and limited government values and, hey, sometimes even some theology. And that's always a lot of fun, too. Hey, folks, welcome to the program. Mr. Tim Loggins with the Patriots of Act 746. And I want to remind everybody that the Patriots of Act 746, they're making this segment possible. And they're on a mission to educate you about your Second Amendment rights here in Arkansas, specifically constitutional carry, the idea of permitless carry. Find out more. Go to Facebook.com and search for Patriots of Act 746 and ask to be a member to this fantastic group today. Tim, welcome, sir.
Good morning, Paul. How are you?
I'm doing good, Tim. I'm doing good. You've been following the news this morning. I mean, it's kind of wild and stuff. It's definitely campaign season.
I have learned more about politics in the last year than I ever wanted to, I believe. Politics in Arkansas is pretty dirty.
Yeah. No, it really is. It really is. It is a blood sport. Okay, so, Tim, can you give us an update at all on Attorney General Leslie Rutledge? And, you know, we've been waiting on an opinion. Senator Linda Collins Smith sent a letter to her asking for an official opinion about the penalty if you get, you know, if you carry without a permit. And we have not gotten a response yet from that. And I think it's safe to say that we're not going to get one before the primary. That's my fear.
Well, I wish I could give you an update, Paul. I know what you know. Senator Linda Collins Smith asked for that opinion back, I believe, in January. So we're almost at 5 months now since her request, and you're right. We're probably not going to get the opinion issued, and you know, most opinions take 4 weeks or so, maybe 6 weeks, and this one's been 5 months on a relatively simple request. And I can draw some conclusions. I mean, obviously, I think there's some political implications there. We have a primary coming up on the 22nd. Early voting's already started, and I'm afraid that Leslie Rutledge is not wanting to issue that opinion because it's going to sway some voters.
Really? So when Senator Linda Collins Smith writes this letter, obviously she's read the law and she knows that she knows something. So what is it that she knows that she's going to get from an impartial opinion, and just, you know, what is it we're looking for here?
Well, I'm going to start out by saying that Senator Linda Collins Smith is one of the greatest supporters we have in the legislature for our gun rights. She has battled since she's been in office, trying to protect our rights and trying to expand our rights, and she knows what the law says. She's actually a member of Patriots of Act 746, so she knows what 573-120 says. She knows what 573-301 through 326 says. She knows the law. And the law doesn't say that you need a permit to carry concealed, and there's no punishment in the law. Now, that's a plain reading of the laws. So she did that request because a lot of people say, hey, we need some clarification. Well, actually, what we need clarification from is the manufactured confusion that our governor, our attorney general, and others have perpetuated, all to protect a revenue stream for the Arkansas State Police. So Senator Linda Collins Smith was just, you know, hey, clarify this for us, Attorney General. Tell us what the law says. Very simple request, and we can't get an answer in 5 months when there's only 2 statutes to really look at. And, you know, there's got to be some political reasons why she won't issue that opinion.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, I think it would directly contradict what Governor Asa Hutchinson said so, you know, Jan Morgan has made the governor come out and pretend to be a conservative or take really what on face value you might think are hard right positions, but they're really not. But one of those was, all of a sudden he says we have constitutional carry, and he uses that phrase constitutional carry because that's the phrase Jan Morgan was using. But his definition of constitutional carry isn't actually constitutional carry. He just changed, you know, he changed what his phrase was, just like he changed the name from the private option to Arkansas Works. He really didn't alter his opinion at all. He just, you know, started calling it something different to save the Arkansas State Police budget. Isn't that right?
Yes, sir. They're making about $4 million+ a year. I don't know exactly what that funds for the state police. I've heard it's their retirement fund. I'm not sure about that. You know, it's a case of the governor's perception is his reality, and he's defining what reality is when he defines constitutional carry as you can carry open but you need a permit to carry concealed. And, oh, by the way, check with your local prosecutor to see if you can do either one of those.
Yeah, even do that.
That's not reality.
Yeah, it's Wild West.
That's not reality.
Yeah, so if Leslie Rutledge were to issue this opinion and all of a sudden we found out there's no penalty for concealing a weapon without a permit, then that's going to make it out like our chief executive officer is diminishing our Second Amendment rights by fiat, by his word, which actually, because I believe an armed society is a polite society, actually makes us less safe when it comes to being able to exercise our human right to freely defend ourselves. It's my
I agree 100%, Paul. I agree 100%. And I'm going to go further than that. It's not just about the governor, although it would make him look bad. Leslie Rutledge painted herself into a corner with her opinion back in 2015. The 8th Circuit Court of Appeals has actually come out in opposition of portions of that opinion. You know, the police can't stop you simply because a weapon's seen. Her opinion in 15 said that they could. And there's implications for other races as well. I mean, you've got supporters of this enhanced carry that was passed last session that are touting that as them being pro-Second Amendment. You've got Bob Ballinger. You've got James Sturch. You've got politicians across this state who say they support the Second Amendment. And if Leslie Rutledge come out right now, it wouldn't just hurt just the governor, and it wouldn't just help Jan Morgan. I mean, Senator Linda Collins Smith is in a primary battle. And her opponent is using her no vote against that enhanced carry to say she's not for the Second Amendment. And this would be good press for her if Leslie Rutledge come out with an opinion that says what the law is.
Yeah.
So I think she's playing politics across the board. It's not just about the governor's race, although it is about the governor's race.
Yeah.
But you got a lot of politicians that's going to benefit with no opinion being issued.
Yeah, that is a shame, and I've been people have been sending me James Sturch mailers that are just so inaccurate. It's really sad how inaccurate his mailers are and how he's lying about his record. And yeah, I'll use that word. He's lying. He says he is supporting school choice, yet he voted against it. And if he's trying to say that Linda not voting for the enhanced carry bill is anti-Second Amendment, I mean, I don't see how. I mean, that's just, it's a context thing. They're counting on people not understanding what actually went on down there and the tricks and the legislative sleight of hand that went on. There's no way, if you saw what happened, I mean, that you would want to support a bill that just was it was all a political consideration for the governor so that he wouldn't look bad and veto a Second Amendment bill. And that's why you ended up getting what you got. And it was just sick to me to watch these people just bow down to him when they've got all the authority in the legislature, and they could have done whatever they wanted to do with the Second Amendment, and the Republican majority would have voted for it, and he would have just had to have dealt with it, but they didn't want to do that. Anyway.
Well, we find, Paul, that those that cry the loudest about them being for freedom and limited government and probably aren't. Charlie Collins and Linda Collins Smith both had simple campus carry bills that were perverted because the governor didn't want to sign it. And I don't know if it was because he was getting pressure from Walmart or from the SEC or who it was, or if he truly believes the Second Amendment is a privilege and not a right.
He said it many times. I'm going to take him at his word. He said it's a privilege, that we have a Second Amendment privilege. He said it multiple times. I know. Allegedly, he's in a private conversation. He said, that they're synonymous with rights. No, they're not. It's not. It doesn't convey the same thing. A right is something that's yours. A privilege is something that is, going to be taken away or can be taken away. I feel like the governor thinks the Second Amendment is really just about hunting. And I think if you want to carry one of those handgun thingies, and this is just I'm trying to channel him. I think he would. I think he wants you to check in with the government first before you can carry one of those. That's what I think.
I believe it's a deeply philosophical argument that we need to have. I believe the governor does believe it's a privilege and not a right because he believes in government control. I can say the same thing about Leslie Rutledge now, and that disappoints me. She put out a piece on social media about I will always defend your Second Amendment rights. And she's wearing creased camouflage that just came off the shelf and holding some type of weapon like she was holding a guitar.
Who is this now?
Leslie Rutledge.
Oh, okay.
The Attorney General.
Okay, yeah, sorry.
And honestly, Paul, I mean, they're pandering to folks like us that cherish our gun rights, and once every election cycle, they put out a photo of them in camo and say that has something to do with the Second Amendment. And they really don't believe in the Second Amendment. They think it's about hunting. They believe in government control. And I'm sorry, Attorney General, but I can draw no other conclusion. You're playing politics with my rights. We need an opinion. We requested it. We deserve it. And you're playing politics with it, and that should have some consequences.
Yeah. Well, if it's been 5 months, I mean, that normally opinions don't take 5 months to be released. In the press, the standard is when a legislator writes and asks for an opinion from the Attorney General provides it. Just tell us what the law says. Oh my goodness. Hey Tim, I want to talk to you about a story that broke yesterday. We interviewed Luther Suter, the attorney, and his client Heath Harris. They're suing Asa Hutchinson in his official capacity as governor and personally because he said he was fired because he didn't hire who Asa wanted. He was a poultry commission and livestock commission employee, and he hired who he thought to be more qualified. Asa says, allegedly. Well, the idea is, Asa hasn't responded at all, but in the complaint, he was fired because he didn't hire who the governor wanted. That's essentially the gist of it. So I'm just curious. You've been, in Arkansas a long time. Is that the culture at state agencies that if you don't, toe the line, that your job's at stake? I'm just curious to get your reaction.
When I was reading that lawsuit online, Paul, I was shaking my head and laughing, actually, because that is so common in state government. I retired with 28 years with the state of Arkansas. You know what? That doesn't surprise me at all. It happens every day all across the state, and it has for the last 30-plus years. One time when I first started back in the 80s, I said that I wouldn't vote for the governor, and that was Bill Clinton at the time. And I was called into my boss's office and threatened with termination because I didn't support the sitting governor. The promotion practices, the hiring practices, it's very common to know who's going to get hired or who's going to get a promotion before the board's ever held. It depends on who you know, who likes you, and very seldom is it actually about who the most qualified candidate is. And that's a sad statement on our government.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really is. It really is. Well, I'm glad they stepped up, and I'm glad that they're, just at least putting their story out there. I wonder if there's any more who will, put their stories out there. What do you think?
I think that it's zero chance of it, Paul, if they're still employed. Mm-hmm. The repercussions of losing your job, of getting transferred to somewhere you don't want to be away from your family, getting reassigned to a job that you don't want, can't do, not qualified for simply because you're not listening to the powers that be. That's a real problem in state government. That needs some reform.
Yeah.
The governor talks about he's going to consolidate state agencies. What he really needs to do is take a hard look at this good old boy system we got leading the state of Arkansas government. We should be hiring the best and the brightest. And too many times we hire who's liked, who's a friend of someone with political power. And it's not just the governor, but that's a problem. When I started in the 80s, okay, I can understand that. But here we are, 2018. You would think that Bill Clinton-style government would be gone. And instead, we're seeing it increasing under this governor. And that needs to go. Yeah. It's time for the people to stand up and say enough's enough.
Yeah, you're exactly right. We are living still in the shadow of Bill Clinton and all of these agencies and everything else, and it does. They just need to implement the reform that the Republican Party claims that it stands for. Okay, and I know we're talking about government, and I know government is a behemoth, and I know I don't think you can ever truly eliminate all corruption. But that's why we need to shrink government so that they have less power to affect our lives in a negative way. But surely, if you get fired because you don't you hire the more qualified candidate and you get fired for that, I think that's just absolutely unacceptable, and it needs to be brought to light. Tim Loggins with Patriots Vac 746. I'll give you the last word, sir.
Paul, I appreciate this opportunity to spread the message, not only about our gun rights in 746, but about everything that's near and dear to conservatives. I appreciate having the voice, and Conduit and you are allowing this message to get out, and I appreciate that.
Well, I thank you, Tim. You be safe, and it's always a pleasure having you on.
Yes, sir. I enjoyed it.
Yes, sir.
Thanks,
all right.
sir.
Yes, sir. All right, so, folks, we're going to take a break here. And if you want to respond to any of this, you can give us a phone call or a text message. The number 870-275-9799. Back in just a moment.
With public corruption and scandals in the news daily, Arkansans need someone with honesty and integrity in the state Senate. Mark Johnson is that man. Mark Johnson isn't a politician. He's a fifth-generation Arkansan and a successful small business owner. Mark Johnson will make ethics a priority and demand swift punishment for those who violate the public trust. Mark Johnson is pro-life and supports the Second Amendment. In the Republican primary, vote Mark Johnson for the state Senate. Paid for by Mark Johnson for Arkansas.
It's been said that freedom is in the DNA of every American, and I would say every Arkansan. Our nation and state are now in danger of letting our God-given freedom slip away by allowing government to be the arbiter of freedom. I agree with President Ronald Reagan, who said, and I quote, "In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem, government is the problem," end quote. Government is too large, too overreaching, and too corrupt. President Reagan also said, and I quote, "The most terrifying words in the English language are, 'I'm from the government and I'm here to help,'" end quote. This race is about voting for the candidate who best represents your interest, your family, and your future. For the last 2 terms in office, I've kept my promises to you, and I ask for your help to continue to represent our joint values of faith, family, and a protected future. I'm State Representative Dan Sullivan, and the choice is clear. I ask for your vote to continue our stand for freedom. Early voting is underway, and the election is May 22nd.
Paid for by Sullivan for Arkansas.
Arkansans need a true judicial conservative on the Supreme Court. David Sterling is that man. Sterling believes in the separation of powers in our government, and he will interpret the Constitution based on the original intent of the Founding Fathers. A member of the NRA and the Christian Legal Society, Sterling will serve Arkansans with honor and integrity as our next Supreme Court Justice. On May 22nd, vote David Sterling.
Paid for by Friends of David Sterling.
If you're like me, you believe that small business is the heart of Arkansas's economic engine, and it should be viewed that way by the politicians in Little Rock. Conduit for Commerce also believes, like you and I believe, policies that achieve less regulation and lower taxation help small business in Arkansas thrive. Other policies like small, constitutionally consistent government and reducing citizen dependency on government keeps it from growing and expanding its influence on our daily lives. Conduit for Commerce works every day to educate the general public and legislators on these important priorities in the name of Arkansas small business. By the way, contributions to Conduit for Commerce are tax deductible. Log on now to conduitforcommerce.org and click on Contact Us on the right side of the page. That's conduitforcommerce.org. Go there now and learn the facts on protecting small business in Arkansas.
bringing you your daily dose of truth. It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
All right, folks, welcome back to the show. This is intersection of conservative ideas and reality. We want to see conservative ideas become a reality for everyone in our sphere of influence. The phone number, did I give the phone number out already? 870-275-9799. That is the telephone number if you would like to contribute to the program. Taking a quick glance over at conduitforaction.org, we have this story that I don't think we got to yesterday. I don't have it for you, Joe. You have to go there and find it yourself. But we'll get to the next hour. ACE's tax farce is next priority. Axing back to school sales tax holiday. Also, did anybody see that story in the Gazette the other day? It was talking about Clark Tucker and their Democrat primary for Congress, right? Isn't that what he's running for, Congress? And Clark Tucker was described as his former state representative, their Democrat primary. And anyway, I just couldn't help but notice that in the description of Clark Tucker and talking about, well, he's the moderate Democrat, it sounded just like Asa. It sounded just like Asa Hutchinson. By the way, I think it was Clark Tucker's idea. It was Clark Tucker's idea to give the line item veto the idea. You know what I'm saying? To get around the constitutional spending requirement for the Arkansas Senate and House. It was Clark Tucker, the Democrats' idea to just get the Democrats to vote for a bill that would have defunded Obamacare in Arkansas, but they relied on ASA to cross that line out so funding would still maintain it. And they unconstitutionally get around the 3/4 majority require. I mean, they basically get the whole intent of that law is to say, if we're going to spend money on something, if the state is going to act, well, then we need to make sure that we don't have a simple majority, but we have a super majority, because we want to do right by as many Arkansans as we can, and 75% is pretty close, and most people can live with 75% approval, when we're going to spend money on whatever it is. The fact is, they didn't really get the 75%. I mean, they got it, but they got it through legislative sleight of hand and an unconstitutional maneuver. I mean, it's like, to me, it's like, it's the equivalent of DACA or something with when Obama, goes beyond his powers. Oh, you know what? Speaking of the Poultry Commission guy, again, if you're just joining us, the lawsuit that was filed against Asa Hutchinson as governor because he apparently or allegedly wrongfully terminated somebody in the Poultry Commission for not hiring the person that Asa wanted him to. That's the allegation. Gene McVeigh went on Facebook and compared Asa to Rob Blagojevich. Do you remember Rob Blagojevich? Joe, do you know who Rob Blagojevich is? I love to say that name. Blagojevich. Okay, he was the governor of Illinois. And when Obama got elected, he was senator from Illinois. And Rob Blagojevich was convicted for attempting to sell, because he got to appoint whoever was going to fill out the rest of Obama's term as a senator. And so he was convicted of trying to sell Barack Obama's Senate seat to the highest bidder. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so if you go look at line 15 of this lawsuit where it talks about patronage, it talks about political patronage and rewarding that political patronage with a job, even if you're unqualified for it. Anyway, I was like, wow. Gene McVeigh, man, he's a Republican pioneer, that one. I mean, he's been at this for a long, long while. One more hour coming your way next.
The news and talk of Northeast Arkansas. This is News Talk 101.3 FM and 12:30 AM KBTM, Jonesboro, an EAB radio station.
They've got Conduit News that is on multiple stations across the state. It's pretty much an attack machine on what I'm trying to accomplish in this state, and their message is getting out, and no one else's message is getting through.
It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
$5,000. They spent it pretty much entirely on, John Woods, okay? This Al Hollingsworth family is the same family that sold Ecclesia the 23 acres for more than, $400,000. And, of course, it was only, I think, appraised for something like, $200,000. And then Con Arkansas also received, and this is all documented, Conservative Arkansas also received $5,000 from Randall Shelton, who was just convicted yesterday, on July 10th of 2014. And, then you can look at Janet De La Rosa's campaign report showing that she gave Shelton's Paradigm Consulting, $2,500, I think, back on the August 21st of 2014. So it's all just very, cozy. Let's just say it's cozy. What do you think, Josh?
Yes, that was a question that was asked yesterday at the press conference. What's next? Are there more investigations? Are there more people that will go down? And Dak Keys, the U.S. Attorney, said there are ongoing investigations, but because of their policy, they weren't going to comment on those. Mm-hmm. And so when you look at this case, Paul, it's somewhat similar to the case in New Jersey with Senator Menendez. Some of the same charges, the honest services, wire fraud, and mail fraud. And basically that was, a public official using their public position in a way to get kickbacks and bribes. So on the surface, it appears like, oh, they're just helping out a constituent, when really, when you look, you peel the curtain back, they're getting kickbacks and bribes. And so I think this sets there'll probably be appeals, but this holds up and goes all the way through. There's a new precedent for the federal prosecutors to go after public officials that are doing this type of thing. I mentioned last week, one of the U.S. attorneys put in air quotes, if you're on, quote, retainer and passing legislation for clients or passing legislation to get kickbacks and bribes, I think that falls firmly under these counts that they were convicted of yesterday. And so I think the investigations will keep going, and we'll just have to see if any other legislators fall because of all this.
So you're talking about, okay, Josh Waters, you bring up a great point. You're talking about Senator Bob Menendez. He went up on these corruption charges, and then he got off. He beat the rap, and so a United States senator from New Jersey beats the rap. But it was essentially the same type of claims or charges. They do get John Woods and Randall Shelton, so there's a new precedent. I mean, that is pretty fascinating. It is good that I'm glad that Dak Keys said, hey, look, we do have other investigations, because it's all, look, the more the media reports on this stuff, the more the media reports on Hank Wilkins and everything else, all that does is push our confidence level lower and lower and lower and lower in our government. And these prosecutors, I think they know that when somebody breaks the law, like this, and they're stealing other people's money, that when you see the conviction, it builds confidence up in the system. And I think that's what these U.S. attorneys want. I mean, that would be the ideal goal, right? So, we're in a kind of another waiting game, I guess, to see if there's going to be more shoes to drop.
Yeah. Paul, I was thinking yesterday about this, and, if it wasn't for this investigation, John Woods could be a senator right now. And unfortunately, what's been happening is these politicians who do this kind of a thing, they spend a lot of money covering up the fact or saying the opposite of what their record is. And so yesterday what we saw is, even though John Woods wasn't defeated necessarily at the ballot box, he was defeated ultimately from the jury box. A jury of his peers came back and, gave justice and honestly justice for the people of Arkansas, to try to say, look, if these legislators do this and are corrupt and take these kickbacks and bribes, the federal
I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers.
They seem to be in full-scale retreat from spending cuts and are talking about raising people's taxes again. And I have only one thing to say to the tax increasers. Go ahead, make my day.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. Those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is on now.
The planks in the Republican Party platform matter. They mean something. There are people in Arkansas who have been Republican for a very long time, and they've always wanted to see their neighbors vote the way that you assumed that they believed on the issues, issue by issue. And they've knocked doors. We now have a majority Republican legislature in the Senate and the House. We got a Republican governor, and yet we don't have the reforms implemented. And we've really started taking and making huge. The conservatives started making huge gains in 2010, and we're approaching now, a legislative session in 2019, and it may be close to a decade. Even if we get anything, and I don't really know if we are going to get much more done in terms of real reform. I think that's why these elections are so important. There are primaries, though, across the state, and in many cases, just like State Representative Josh Miller, one of the most conservative state representatives, and he was challenged by the governor in 2016. They found a candidate to challenge Josh Miller. Josh Miller handedly defeated him because of Josh Miller's conservative record. A similar situation is happening in the Northeast Arkansas District 53 with State Representative Dan Sullivan and a Dr. Cole Peck. One of the key. Well, let me just say this. I'm gonna skip my monologue here because we're going to talk to State Representative Dan Sullivan coming up here at 7:33. But on Friday there was a debate at the NEA Political Animals Club between these two candidates in a Republican primary. And in a Republican primary, each candidate is trying to convince the electorate that they're the more conservative, and that's essentially what's happened here. The difference being Dan Sullivan actually has a voting record to back it up. Also, you have to look at, who is funding Dr. Cole Peck. Specifically, it's people from the healthcare industry who are very upset at State Representative Dan Sullivan's bill to save taxpayer money and allow advanced practice nurses to practice within the full scope of their training. Okay. And so this was... they talked a lot about this at the debate. Matter of fact, let's get to that one first. Let's go to the question of advanced practice nurses. Joe, do you see that one? Yeah. So this was the question: are you for advanced practice nurses practicing to their full scope? This was on Friday. Take a listen.
My question is: are you for full practice authority for nurse practitioners in Arkansas?
And this is Dan Sullivan speaks first.
I've sponsored that twice, and it's been very heavy lift to do that because doctors show up en masse in their white coats, and The fact is, the Medical Society and the Hospital Association are two of the most powerful lobbies in the state of Arkansas, bar none. And when you go up against that lobby, you risk not getting donations for your campaign from the Medical Society and the hospital, which is a lot of money for a lot of people. You also risk not being on committees and not being seen as somebody who will toe the line and do what you're supposed to do. I fit in that category, but I've stood for that because it's the right thing to do for Arkansas, and it will drive down the cost considerably. But to me, the issue is not just whether we allow licensed people to practice to the full scope of their training and ability. As I mentioned, in Arkansas State, we're well-trained, well-qualified, highly successful people and professional people. And we're going to let them come out and we're going to cap them and say you can't do that. How many other degrees at Arkansas State are you willing to do that to? How many would you be willing to limit what those people can do? It's only the rare group where we put that cap on expertise and professionalism. To me, it's also about my ability to choose to go to you. If I choose to go to you, who is the Medical Society or the Medical Board, then tell me I can't. That's between you and us. And I stand for personal freedom. Again, just another example. I get to carry around a loaded weapon, but I can't choose to go see an APN. It just doesn't sound right.
Stop.
Thank you.
It's a great moment there where, and I'm going to ask Dan about that when he comes on here. This concept of we just are not for. We have a system that's not for personal choice, and he stands up for personal freedom to be able to choose your health care provider. But the regulations in Arkansas are not like the regulations elsewhere. So we have advanced practice nurses who leave the state of Arkansas because of regulation, because they can't practice to the full scope of their practice. Now, Cole Peck and his backers oppose a legislation that would allow advanced practice nurses to practice within the full scope. We'll listen to what Cole Peck says about this.
Several years. My clinics, the ER, we use nurse practitioners. I have no issue with nurse practitioners. I respect them as individuals. I value the work that they do. But when a nurse practitioner graduates, they have about 2,000 to 3,000 clinical hours before they see their first patient. Physician, when they graduate from residency, has between 16,000 and 20,000 hours. And to be honest, neither one of those is probably enough to feel fully comfortable taking care of a patient. So like I was talking about with the telemedicine issue earlier, to me, you got to put the patient first about safety. Okay, so you have a newly minted nurse practitioner, you put her out in a very rural area all by herself, and what you're asking is to take the safety net of a collaborative physician away.
Stop. Is he assuming the gender there? Uh-oh. He's assuming the gender. Put her all by herself. She's just a stupid woman. All right, keep going.
Sorry about that. Now, for the nurse practitioner that's been out there for 15, 10 years, that's a different story. It's a totally different story.
My goodness.
And I think when it comes to healthcare, the team approach is best. And the team being all the way from the receptionist to the nurse, to the doctor, to the nurse practitioner. It should be a team approach, all working together to deliver the best care possible. And so, yeah, I support nurse practitioners. And for freedom to choose, you can see a nurse practitioner in the next 5 minutes if you want to. There's one. You guys should go to my clinic and you can see. So you have the right to choose, and it's already there.
It's already there. You are now. What a weird. This has got to be corrected. What a strange answer. He says he likes nurse practitioners, but does not support their. It does not support what Dan Sullivan said, to practice within the full scope, which would save taxpayer money because the Medicaid, you get a lower reimbursement rate for nurse practitioners. The state pays less for them than they do doctors, which is why the Medical Society opposes it. And so he says, I don't want them to be able to do that because they don't have the experience. And so he is basically, in the name of public safety. That's Cole Peck there. I don't believe in that choice. I don't believe in giving you, the individual, the freedom to contract with whoever you want, to go see whoever you want. I don't believe in that. But then at the end of his statement, he says, Oh, by the way, you have the choice. You have the choice. You can go see one right now. But not in the full scope, you can't. Anyway, is that not strange? He's all over the place in answering this. And the reason I want to look, I understand he was talking about me last night. He backed out of the Craighead County Republican Committee debate. And then when we talked about it on the program, he all of a sudden, and we've got text messages, he was out. He absolutely backed out of the debate last night in this Republican primary. And then he came back and decided, no, I am going to debate. I am going to debate now, okay, which is really strange. And I understand last night he was talking about me, or I came up in some capacity, whatever. Listen, I've invited you on the program. I'd love to talk to you and actually try to help you communicate better because you're all over the place. But I'm going to use this debate and this audio. Now we have you on a position, okay? We know that Dan Sullivan wants less regulations in healthcare, and you want the same. You don't want any because your backers want everything to stay the same, and you support Arkansas Works. Let's get to the next contrast between these two candidates, okay? And let's get to Arkansas Works. Here, I want you to listen to, does Kolpeck answer this question? Yeah, Kolpeck answers this question first. He gets a question from the audience, and it's the strangest answer. Kolpeck defends Arkansas Works Obamacare, a welfare program, by criticizing other welfare programs. It's very strange. Listen to this.
How do you possibly support in your statement about Arkansas Works when you know how much it costs? And do you know when the enrollees have gone up and up, I think from 225,000 to 320,000, and how can you possibly lower taxes as when Arkansas is in Medicaid expansion?
Well, again, the Obamacare penalties and the taxes that come with Obamacare are going to be there regardless if you get rid of Arkansas Works.
Stop for a second.
Arkansas Works is
first of all, the penalties, okay, of Obamacare, the big one, the individual mandate, is gone. So you might want to include that one. So that's a key plank in Obamacare. So it's coming crashing down. Secondly, the dish payments to hospitals have not stopped, and they're never going to stop. So there was no reason to do this. But keep going.
Coming down instead of going up. You know, there was a lot of abuse that was going on. People who were living in other states, people that didn't really qualify, that were getting on it. And so over the last year or so, those have been purged. But if you want to get people off Arkansas,
door's still open.
You got to bring jobs back to the area, and people got to be willing to take those jobs. Okay, and we're talking about entitlement reform.
Stop.
It should just be
Stop.
healthcare. It should be all.
So he's for Arkansas Works. If you want to get rid of it, you got to bring jobs back to the area. Well, okay. And then you got to have people willing to take those jobs. Okay, well, we have people who are not willing to take those jobs, sir. That's why they're on Arkansas Works. They're not on Arkansas Works because there's no jobs. Is he saying that people are on Arkansas Works because there's no jobs? That doesn't make any sense. Keep going.
Again, I work in the ER. I see this. Like in the springtime, you'll see all these people are getting, they don't even pay taxes. They get all this money back. They're out buying new phones, new cars. So who's paying for that? That's all of us. We're paying for that. And that's not right.
Stop.
So we got to do better.
He is trying to defend his support for Arkansas Works welfare by criticizing Obama phones and people who get the earned income tax credit. Does he not see that those two things are really weirdly the opposite? Like that, he's contradicting himself. That doesn't make any sense. If we're talking about a conservative worldview, that makes no sense. Any way you shake it. Keep going.
Cost of health care down for everybody.
All right, so we've got to bring the stop. We got to bring the cost of health care down for everybody. And I don't even know. Like, Arkansas Works is not going to do that. I mean, we're still 48th or 49th in health care since we've implemented this thing. Okay, so back it up a little bit. So State Representative Dan Sullivan responds to the question of Arkansas Works. Again.
Care is not the problem.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's the cost of health care that's the problem. And I sponsored several bills to bring down the health care that do not impact Affordable Care Act. The APN would save us tens of millions of dollars. Telehealth save us tens of millions of dollars. Allowing our pharmacists to do some more than they currently practice would save us tens of millions of dollars. In the study that the state did about the task force, we all let them know, telehealth and APNs were a part of that plan, but never got heard. Never got heard. That's the way we drive down health care. Enrollment.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. They never got heard because the medical society, and they're all one big, giant healthcare industrialized complex is what they are. Do I have to go to break? Okay, I've got at least one more clip I want to play from this debate. And these differences, by the way, a big difference was tort reform. And there's a huge difference in almost every Republican primary is whether or not you support that tort reform. Another difference between State Representative Dan Sullivan and Cole Peck. Cole Peck supports that bad tort reform law, and Dan Sullivan voted against it. Has a voting record of voting against it because it's bad tort reform, and we'll tell you why here in just a moment. Don't go anywhere.
Arkansans need a true judicial conservative on the Supreme Court. David Sterling is that man. Sterling believes in the separation of powers in our government, and he will interpret the Constitution based on the original intent of the Founding Fathers. A member of the NRA and the Christian Legal Society, Sterling will serve Arkansans with honor and integrity as our next Supreme Court Justice. On May 22nd, vote David Sterling.
Paid for by Friends of David Sterling.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is building a liberty machine. Find out more at conduitnews.com.
Oh, yeah, that's crazy. All right, so I was at this debate on Friday, the Northeast Arkansas Political Animals Club between State Representative Dan Sullivan and Dr. Cole Peck. And they asked the audience for questions, and I decided to ask a question, and this was my question. Take a listen.
It's kind of a two-parter, but because it's a Republican primary and everybody's trying to convince the electorate that they're the most conservative. My question has to do with pro-life. And so the first part would be about the tort reform amendment that's on the ballot this November. The Arkansas Family Council, which has been a tireless warrior for pro-life causes, they oppose the tort reform on the basis of it puts a price on human life. And there's also Rose Mims, who's worked for Arkansas Right to Life. She personally is trying to campaign against this tort reform amendment based on that same idea of being pro-life. So that's the first part. And then the second part would be on the pro-life. We also do have Arkansas Works, which is taxpayer dollars going to fund insurance policies that can potentially pay for the Plan B bill, the Plan B pill or abortifacients. And so trying to figure out maybe which one or if you guys are more pro-life than the other. If you guys could address that, I'd appreciate it.
Stop. Okay, so that was my question. I think it's a fair question. Trying to figure out which one of these guys is more pro-life. You know, that's the low-hanging fruit issue, right? Well, that question, I just want you to know, it derailed the rest of the debate, because then Cole Peck supporters in the audience had to ask every other question was about, it seemed like everything was about tort reform from there on out. So didn't mean to, just wanted to get an answer on that. I wanted somebody to respond to Arkansas Works taxpayer funding going to Fund Plan B, and I wanted to know what you think about the pro-life organization Family Council, that opposes anything that's going to limit life from natural birth to natural death, or I'm sorry, conception to natural death, and I wanted to know the answer to that. State Representative Dan Sullivan responded first.
Really? Yeah, I think it's a difficult question, and I wouldn't want to down somebody's position on life.
Somebody in the audience went, really?
That's a difficult thing to do. I do know that I have a consistent record with Right to Life, both those groups that look at and engage those issues. My position on tort reform, I voted against that because I think our right to trial by jury is really important, and it sets a high bar for me if we're going to move away from that. The issue is, if it passes, then we'll allow our executive branch to put the rules in place to make that happen. And then the legislative branch will approve those rules. Folks, if you listen to the radio this morning, we've got a number of legislators going to jail. And I don't trust those folks to make the rules and set those by tort reform. I trust our trial by jury. There's no perfect system, but I believe our jury system and that trial by jury is critically important. There is a movement out there to let our governor appoint our chief justices. Now, can you imagine our chief justices being appointed by our governor, and then the legislature and our governor writing the rules for court systems? Again, I voted against the tort reform. And another side of this is, it says we will limit what attorneys can make. Folks, I don't want to limit what anybody can make. I don't want to limit what you can make. I don't want to limit what our doctors can make. But when we say these prices are skyrocketing over here on the court side, folks, they're skyrocketing in healthcare. Why don't we, if we're going to limit one, why wouldn't we limit the other? And I'm for limiting neither. Thank you.
Yeah, really good stuff there. And as State Representative Dan Sullivan talking about, I think his strongest point there was when he said, folks, I don't know if you were listening, but we got a lot of legislators going to jail. Do we want those guys to write the rules of evidence for the judiciary? And some nursing home owner who's in a big lawsuit, and then all of a sudden you'll have, all of a sudden you'll have something slipped in some bill somewhere that says the jury in this case can't consider these factors. And do not think that the legislature wouldn't do it. Do not think the legislature wouldn't do it. John Woods, was, in Preferred Family Healthcare people in their thermostat company, says otherwise. John Woods and him trying to slip something in to where Ecclesia College would get all the tax money if medical marijuana ever became legal, says otherwise, right? Eddie Cooper says otherwise. Hank Wilkins says otherwise. What other companies do legislators have interest in that they've passed bills and pieces of legislation for to benefit themselves? How else has this gone down? Right? Don't think that they wouldn't bat an eye at telling the jury you can't consider this incriminating evidence against a nursing home for neglect or abuse. No, I'm sorry. I believe in the separation of powers. I also believe in some form of tort reform, but not a tort reform that is specifically catered to the nursing home industry, not a tort reform that is going to limit how much an attorney can make, because I wouldn't want anyone to limit how much I can make as a radio host. We're going to be right back with State Representative Dan Sullivan, and we'll probably listen to Cole Peck and his comment on that question. Again, the question was trying to find out who's more pro-life here, and the Family Council says tort reform is not pro-life, yet Cole Peck, you support tort reform. Dan Sullivan, you don't support the bad tort reform that's on the ballot this November. We'll take your text messages at 870-275-9799. Back in a minute.
They've got Conduit News that is on multiple stations across the state. It's pretty much an attack machine on what I'm trying to accomplish in this state, and their message is getting out, and no one else's message is getting through.
It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
Prosecutors are going to come after them if they stop to it, even if people aren't able to vote them out at the ballot box.
I want to go back. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I want to go back to something that you said about at the press conference or in the court talking about attorneys. So if you're an attorney and you are being paid a retainer and then you are passing bills, that is illegal. Is essentially, is that to you kind of what the federal authorities are now trying to say? That's now the standard?
I think so. This came up in jury instructions. This, the air quotes of retainer, and so I would argue it absolutely does. When you look at the elements of honest services wire fraud, and someone's taking a retainer, they're taking public action, an official act in their public position to try to help a client, knowing that they're going to be receiving personal benefit, personal income through this retainer agreement. I think a lot of that could very well fulfill the elements of the crimes that John Woods and Randall Shelton were convicted of.
And here's the thing. I think it could go even further than that. If that's the new standard, it could go even further than that. I mean, if you're an attorney and you're also a legislator and you are employed by a law firm, but being in the Arkansas General Assembly is your full-time job, and you're not an actual practicing attorney. I mean, what's the difference there? What's the difference? I mean, are you then all not essentially, you're just kind of being paid to pass bills? I mean, that's what this gets down to is what if you're being paid to pass legislation, then we can all agree that that's wrong. Like the extra money to pass legislation, that is not a system that we think is going to produce good government. We can agree there. Now, the question is, how do you reform things to where we can stop this stuff from happening?
Yeah,
I mean, you're an attorney. You're an attorney, Josh. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong here.
No, I don't think you are, Paul. And if we don't know that this is happening, the only way he was convicted is because of this investigation, and they got all these bank records. They subpoenaed all these messages, and it took them 2.5.
Need your daily news fix? Don't forget to tune in to Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the program. Also, welcome. We got Dan Sullivan. Welcome, sir. Thanks for coming.
Paul. Good to be here.
Yeah. Good morning to you. Waking up with us. So you're in this primary. The early voting has started. I want to be clear. I've invited your opponent on, multiple times. He's welcome to come on still, even though I think I just would have a lot of questions for him.
It's a great opportunity, Paul, to whether you agree with people or disagree with people, your representatives have an obligation to talk not only with the people who agree with you, but also with the people who might contend with you. And that's difficult to do as a state rep or our senator, is go on stage or go in front of a group that disagrees with you. But that's your obligation. That's what you're elected to do.
Yeah, and you try to convince people with your argument when you do have a disagreement. I think you're exactly right. I want to finish up with this statement, though. The Northeast Arkansas Political Animals Club, we got your position on tort reform. You are against it. You voted against it. We don't, because, I don't have a lot on your opponent in terms of his positions, but this debate with the Northeast Arkansas Political Animals, really appreciate them and putting this video out on Facebook. And so let's listen to your opponent's stance on tort reform,
sure,
and then we'll get your reaction, Joe. Whatever.
So when it comes to pro-life, I'm very pro-life. I donate to pro-life organizations. I vote for pro-life candidates. And I've dedicated my life to saving lives. So I don't know how you get more pro-life than that. I take care of patients that have had heart attacks, that have been in car accidents, child abuse patients. I try to save life. All life is precious to me. And it's not just the unborn, but it's all life. So I'm very pro-life. And when you talk about tort reform, putting a, quote, price on life, to be honest with you, I disagree with that. We put a price on life. Do I think it's right? No, I don't think it's right. There is no price to life, but it's not a tort reform issue. For instance, you come to the ER, I save your life. They put a cap on that. There's a price. How much your life is worth, the Medicare, if I save your life in the ER? $180.
All right, stop. So that was Cole Peck. He said that we do put a price on life. Do I think it's right? No. So my question would be, well, then if you don't think it's right, why would you support the tort reform? Because he does support the tort reform. He's very clear he supports this bad tort reform amendment on the November ballot. Dan, just let me get your reaction to that.
Yeah. First, a person can have a right to life position different from what tort reform is. So I concede his position that he's for it. But there are a lot of other organizations and well-respected organizations.
Pro-life organizations.
Pro-life. And, Paul, when you look at the whole spectrum of what conservatives do and what conservatives say, everybody or anybody can claim to be a conservative. So who judges that? Of course, the voters judge that. The voters judge who has the more conservative position. And in this case, on this current bill, Rose Mims from Arkansas Right to Life, although they haven't taken a position, she has opposed to this bill. Mm-hmm. And the Arkansas Family Council has clearly, and Jerry Cox, I think you have him on tomorrow.
Tomorrow, yeah.
Has clearly taken a position that this is a right to life issue. So I support. And to me, it's a right to life issue. That's one of the reasons I voted the way I did. But again, my opponent can take whatever position he pleases and can claim whatever position he pleases.
The reason this is important is because we're talking about a Republican primary, and this was the premise of my question. We're trying to figure out some differences between you two. And you have a record, and he's essentially, aside from Arkansas Works and tort reform and nurse practitioners, he says he's conservative to everybody. And so I am trying to vet that.
Sure.
Because I think it's an important thing to vet. We have to have some that's what a primary in the Republican Party is about the distinctions, because you're really trying to get the most conservative candidate in a Republican primary. That's what
some are.
Well, yes, some are, but that's what and then in the Democrat primary, they're trying to get the most progressive or liberal candidate. Yeah. And so it's important to get distinctions, and that's one of the reasons I just wanted him to come on the show, for the interest of our democracy. To be able to really let the people decide, but they have to know how you guys differ. Not just saying we're all alike all the time.
One of those you talked about, advanced practice nurses, and that for some people it gets a little bit in the weeds. But folks, it's really about our position on property rights. The property right, the intellectual property right that nurses have, is no different than the property right that a farmer has. It's no different than the property right that you have to use the property that you have without intervention by the government. And my position, we met with the advanced practice nurses last night. There were probably 30 of them at a meeting. And that was my point to them. Folks, it's not just about your ability as a licensed professional, but it's about my ability as a consumer or a patient to choose and have the freedom to choose what I want. I think our president talked to the NRA about that last week. I don't know if you sent him my notes or not, but he kind of followed up on me.
Yeah, this is I do want to talk about this. I actually really I wish I could find it. I don't have it at the tip of my fingers, but you actually said that. We played that.
Yeah.
It was so interesting. So just tell everybody what you said at that debate about the concept of restricting people's freedoms. You can't go see an advanced nurse practitioner,
or you can't call your doctor on your telephone.
Right.
But you're willing to allow people to carry a lethal weapon.
Right. Which we support. Which is clear. Which is great. You're just pointing out the contradiction.
Yes. How can both of us say that we are pro Second Amendment, but only one of us says we're going to limit their restriction on calling your doctor on your phone or going to an advanced practice
That's a really good point.
They're just not consistent.
Yeah.
And that's the very point our president was making.
At the NRA, then President Trump, he said like the exact same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, again, I don't know if he was listening to Paul Harrell's show or not.
No.
But, if you take our rights and you put them into a silo and you say you have the Second Amendment right, and you have the First Amendment right, and you have all these amendments and again, remember, those rights were given to us by God, not by the government. So your property rights are not for the government to issue you. Therefore, that God has given you those rights, and you should have some freedom to exercise those. And the same thing in education. Our education has been taken over by the government, and they tell our teachers how, when, where, and what to teach. Experts, research has now determined what your children can hear and learn in school. And it's the same way in medicine now. The government is taking over medicine. And in our educational system, and again, I'm not blaming the teachers. The teachers are the end of the whip on this, and they're getting yanked around everywhere because we have government education. I hope our healthcare system doesn't go the same way. And I hope all of our healthcare professionals, whether they be at whatever level, that they understand that Arkansas Works is the largest expansion of government control in the history of our nation and the history of our state. We're going to end up in the same place we did with education if we don't stop.
Yeah, so speaking of education, we're talking about freedom versus, no freedom. I mean, we had to pass legislation, right? You were integral in passing legislation just to be able to hang a poster in school that says, "In God We Trust."
Absolutely. And, of course, we had the bathroom issue there for a while. And again, they're all the same issue. It's about people being free to choose. At one point in our nation's history, we had that freedom. And government at a point stepped in and said, we're going to start restricting your freedom. And some of us now are trying to get back to the point where it used to be, where you have many freedoms to choose what you want to choose without government interference. We are one of the most highly regulated states in the nation. I think we're fifth from the bottom, or at the top, however you view it, and the number of regulations that we have that just restrict what you can do. And it's time we have real pushback on that and fight for that. But, our government systems, when you fight that, when you propose legislation, when you try to move it back and give people more freedom, the powers that be, the people that are benefiting off of that, the people that are collecting money from the government are going to push back, and they're going to push back hard.
Yeah, and they really are pushing back hard. Your opponent has put out some mailers that are very negative and attacking you, calling you self-serving. How do you respond? How do you respond to the negativity behind some of the stuff he's saying?
Well, we had a meeting last night at the Republican committee, and it went that way. And I'll tell you what my response was. My response was to the very first thing I did when I decided to run for office was go join the Republican Party. I stayed very positive last night and want to continue to. Our Republican Party is an important part of what's going on in politics. We have a very conservative Northeast Arkansas Republican Committee. They knock doors, they help collect money, they help distribute money, they hold signs. They're very supportive. And as a member of that committee, I support our other Republicans. And of course, we have some disagreements, but that's family. And we work that out, but we still hold together. As a matter of fact, in the Republican committee meetings, there's a rule that you shouldn't not to speak against your opponent. And I held to that last night, and will continue to. I've never done negative campaigning. I've always stood, and it's fair to challenge the other person's voting record and say, I wouldn't have voted on such and such an issue this way. I've had those discussions, and that's iron sharpening iron, and that's a good thing. But to attack people's character is just not the thing that we need to do, and especially within our committee. I think it was Ronald Reagan's 11th commandment.
And people throw that one at me a lot.
Yeah.
And I say, no, Reagan would be with me today.
Well, again, but Paul, I think you stay on the issues. And if we're talking about the issues, it's a fair debate to have. Just like, people are saying, well, everybody says they're conservative now.
Yeah.
Everybody says they're pro-life. Everybody says they are Second Amendment champion.
They do.
Yeah, but when you look at what their record is, I had a record of not only standing up for things legislatively, but when the International Property Code came up, that was not a legislative issue, but it was important to my community, and I took a position.
Yeah.
When the local tax increase came up, it was not a legislative decision, but I took a position to stand up at that time. And I think people who decide to run for office need to have a record that I'm a conservative, but here are 3 or 4 things that I've done, even though I wasn't in elected office. Here are some things I've done in the community that demonstrate that I've been conservative. It's not enough for people just to say I am one.
Yeah, platitudes. That's a good point. And I would say the idea that you're self-serving is just not consistent with the fact that you voted. Your former position was in the healthcare industry.
Sure.
And if you would have voted for tort reform, that would have greatly benefited the industry in terms of diminishing people's right to sue or get or seek damages if there is something bad that happens. And you voted against tort reform,
Sure.
which is against your own interest or your former interest.
It's in my interest in that I'm a taxpayer, and that I support freedom, and I want to reduce the size of government. That's what that was about. Arkansas works the same way. I did not vote for it, have fought against it because it's not in the best interest of the taxpayer. Although it did, Arkansas Works helps everybody in the healthcare industry, but it's not in the taxpayer's best interest. So, I would disagree with my opponent in that in the positions I've taken are not self-serving.
Yeah. State Representative Dan Sullivan, I appreciate it. You're going out to knock doors or something, I assume?
Yes. I've got your vote, right?
Yeah. Well, if I lived in District 53, I think the choice would be clear.
That's right. Well, listen, I would encourage people to get out and vote. I think we've only got about 400 or 500 early votes in Jonesboro. And, folks, it's critically important that you get out to vote. Whoever your candidate is, we need for us, our community, to get out and vote and make your voice heard.
All righty. State Representative Dan Sullivan. Folks, we're going to take a break. This is Conduit News Radio. Back in just a moment.
With public corruption and scandals in the news daily, Arkansans need someone with honesty and integrity in the state Senate. Mark Johnson is that man. Mark Johnson isn't a politician. He's a fifth-generation Arkansan and a successful small business owner. Mark Johnson will make ethics a priority and demand swift punishment for those who violate the public trust. Mark Johnson is pro-life and supports the Second Amendment. In the Republican primary, vote Mark Johnson for the state Senate. Paid for by Mark Johnson for Arkansas.
Arkansans need a true judicial conservative on the Supreme Court. David Sterling is that man. Sterling believes in the separation of powers in our government, and he will interpret the Constitution based on the original intent of the Founding Fathers. A member of the NRA and the Christian Legal Society, Sterling will serve Arkansans with honor and integrity as our next Supreme Court Justice. On May 22nd, vote David Sterling.
Paid for by Friends of David Sterling.
It's been said that freedom is in the DNA of every American, and I would say every Arkansan. Our nation and state are now in danger of letting our God-given freedom slip away by allowing government to be the arbiter of freedom. I agree with President Ronald Reagan, who said, and I quote, "In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem," end quote. Government is too large, too overreaching, and too corrupt. President Reagan also said, and I quote, "The most terrifying words in the English language are I'm from the government, and I'm here to help, end quote. This race is about voting for the candidate who best represents your interest, your family, and your future. For the last 2 terms in office, I've kept my promises to you, and I ask for your help to continue to represent our joint values of faith, family, and a protected future. I'm State Representative Dan Sullivan, and the choice is clear. I ask for your vote to continue our stand for freedom. Early voting is underway, and the election is May 22nd.
Paid for by Sullivan for Arkansas. If you're like me, you believe that small business is the heart of Arkansas's economic engine, and it should be viewed that way by the politicians in Little Rock. Conduit for Commerce also believes, like you and I believe, policies that achieve less regulation and lower taxation help small business in Arkansas thrive. Other policies like small, constitutionally consistent government and reducing citizen dependency on government keeps it from growing and expanding its influence on our daily lives. Conduit for Commerce works every day to educate the general public and legislators on these important priorities in the name of Arkansas small business. By the way, contributions to Conduit for Commerce are tax deductible. Log on now to conduitforcommerce.org and click on Contact Us on the right side of the page. That's conduitforcommerce.org. Go there now and learn the facts on protecting small business in Arkansas.
The intersection of conservative ideas and reality. Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
I want to once again thank Jan Morgan, Republican gubernatorial candidate, for forcing Asa Hutchinson to torpedo his own task force's plans to raise your grocery taxes. Jan Morgan coming out and forcing the governor, because she's running for his position, forcing him to once again at least claim the hard right position of no tax increases. Why are we trying to increase taxes? Because we have a revenue problem in his eyes. In his eyes. We have a spending problem in reality, and we have really a budget crisis. Whether you think it's a revenue problem or whether you think it's a spending problem, it's a budget crisis. So we got to raise your taxes on gas, which ASA supports. We got to raise your taxes. We got to create a brand new internet sales tax, which ASA supports. We got to increase your taxes on tires and create a new tax on tires, which ASA supported and passed. We got to create a digital downloads tax for our college students when they download digital books or ringtones. Of course, honestly, who really even downloads a ringtone anymore? But still, there probably are people that download ringtones. I don't know. But anyway, special thanks to Jan Morgan for getting Asa Hutchinson over to the right, at least while he's in campaign mode. And you know what? That is a good thing. It's a good thing because it validates us. It validates you. It validates me. It validates all of us who actually believe in the Republican Party platform. And that's all that I am asking these guys to do, is just stay consistent. Stay consistent with how you campaign. Or maybe you should just be honest and run as a Democrat next time. Be honest about it. You know? Political power is, man, it's seductive, isn't it? And these people who would rather, they would have been Democrats, 10 years ago, and they would agree more with the Democrat platform than they do with the Republican platform, but based on their actions. Raising the grocery tax. Good grief. ConduitForAction.org with this headline, ASA's task force next priority, axing back-to-school sales tax holiday. Thanks to Jan Morgan and her supporters, Governor Asa Hutchinson had to come out and say he doesn't support raising the grocery tax. Morgan led the opposition to the tax increase while Asa spent months trying to sidestep the issue. In an interview on Conduit News with Paul Harrell, Jan Morgan cautioned that while Asa's letter said he does not support a grocery tax increase, he avoids saying he would oppose it if it were to be brought up. And if Asa is elected to another term, he will have a free hand to do whatever he wants. He will not have any accountability. He doesn't have to run for office again because he's term limited out. Lame duck. Second term. Morgan said there are other items on the task force list for elimination, and they are things that primarily help families and farmers. She mentioned several items being considered by ASA's task force and said Asa, quote, Asa has not stood up and told his task force take these things off the table. ASA's task force, quote, was never about reforming a bad tax code, which it was supposed to be about. It is about getting more ways to get more money out of the people, Jan says. The item on the top of the list of ASA's task force is the possibility of eliminating the back-to-school sales tax holiday. The tax holiday occurs every year on the weekend of the first Saturday in August, and the following items are exempt from sales tax, like clothing accessories or equipment, school art supplies, school instructional material, and school supplies. Morgan, who opposes the repeal of this and other exemptions, described the importance of the back-to-school sales tax holiday, saying, buying school supplies and school clothes gets your kids started in school. Getting your kids started in school is costly. It cuts right to the bone for people who are barely making it paycheck to paycheck each month. So that sales tax exemption is very helpful, and it means the difference in school kids getting the supplies they need and not getting the school supplies they need. Senator Linda Collins Smith, who was a co-sponsor of the back-to-school legislation, commented on the task force considering eliminating it. That is disturbing. It's also important to parents. Many parents are just overwhelmed by the cost of getting their children ready to go back to school. It's not just the cost of school supplies, it's also the cost of their children's clothing needs for the fall. And I have teachers in my district, she says, who pay for some of their class supplies out of their own pocket. It's bad enough that they don't have more supplies and the high cost of those supplies, but to take away their opportunity to buy them without tax would be a blow. I'm still proud of helping pass the back-to-school tax holiday, and I will continue my support in keeping it, end quote. The tax holiday is popular and people benefit from it. Do you have children or grandchildren who need school supplies and clothing? Does your family or friends benefit from the back-to-school tax holiday? How many families? How about families who homeschool their children and must pay for all the school materials their children need? In Walmart, the sales tax holiday seems to be the busiest time of the year, other than the Christmas season. Governor Hutchinson has tried to distance himself from the task force, pointing out it's a legislative task force, not an executive branch task force. But he fails to acknowledge he is the driving force behind the task force. In a speech to the legislature, Asa requested the legislature form the task force, and he listed the guidelines the task force would work under. The actual legislation creating the task force was either written or approved by Asa because the multi-page bill was filed the day after his speech. This means even the criteria for selecting who would be on the task force was set by Asa. To seal the deal, Asa gave the legislation to his nephew, Senator Jim Hendren, to sponsor, which guaranteed his nephew would be the chairman of the task force. Even if it had not been Asa's task force, the fact remains he has not spoken against the efforts to grab more tax money. Until Jan Morgan backed him into a corner and he had to say he doesn't support a grocery tax increase. Folks, that article's up right now at conduitforaction.org. Tomorrow on the program, we'll have Senator Linda Collins-Smith at 7:05 and Jerry Cox, the president of the Family Council, talking about the bad tort reform bill at 7:33. All that and much, much more. If you want to get a copy of this broadcast, it's available at facebook.com/Conduit News. It's available at conduitnews.com. It's available at YouTube. Give us a subscribe on YouTube, by the way, so we can be discriminated against one day, that we have high hopes and high aspirations. For being a conservative, of course. And what else? Oh, yeah, Arkansas. Be safe.